But the printing press kind of broke feudalism and said, we don't need a privileged knowledge class who has access to the knowledge to rule if we can all have the same newspaper and all know what's going on, and we can all have access to textbooks and education, all know what's going on. So the idea of a comprehensively educated public and a comprehensively informed public, which means education and the fourth estate or news, media, were considered prerequisite institutions for democracy to function. And that started with a newspaper. And the newspaper ended up evolving into radio and television, news stations. But there were the element of broadcast, that you had some small number of news stations that could put something out and everybody could read the same thing. And they could agree or not agree, they could react against it, but they were at least getting some shared sense of base reality to then be able to make governance choices based on. That was kind of critical to democracy. Now, when the internet emerged and we went from a few publishers to everyone can be publishers, and there was such a flood of information that nobody could possibly see all of the relevant information, and you have 1 billion search results for any search topic, then what I see isn't going to be me searching through all of that. It's going to be some AI that can go through those 1 billion search results and curate recommended videos for me or curate a news feed of content. And what is the basis of how it curates it? So as we all know from, if we pay attention, if we've ever looked at a friend's Facebook page, if I have someone in the middle of the country who's maybe politically right and someone on the coast of the country who's politically left, their Facebook news feeds probably have not a single piece of content in common about the news of the world. And so not only do they have no content in common, how could you possibly run a democracy if people don't have a shared sense of what's going on in the world? It's not only that they don't have it in common, it's that they have things that are increasingly polarizing because the algorithm is optimizing for their attention and their engagement. And it happens to be that the things that scare people and outrage them and create tribal identity and create certainty are the things that make people spend more time on site and make them engage more. What's happening is not only that the sense of shared base reality is broken, but that the realities are becoming increasingly polarized. And as the population becomes increasingly polarized, they elect and support representatives that become increasingly polarized, which means that the integrity of government itself becomes increasingly gridlocked and increasingly broken down. So can you run a open society? Can you run a democracy where the citizens have as their greatest enemy each other, where they have no shared sense of what is true and they have no shared sense of what is good, and there's some kind of voting that has to happen, and anything that either side advances makes the other side feel more threatened? That's the process of the breakdown of a democracy completely. And so we can see that Facebook and YouTube and basically the attention directing tools broke the fourth estate, which means broke democracy. It's really critical to understand that. And when we think of an oil company that maybe before we had an oil company, we didn't have laws about oil spills or about where we would do drilling. And so we had to deal with that post facto. The oil spill caused harm to the commons, but it didn't directly make the government worse. But the oil spill we're talking about here, where the population is increasingly certain about things that are increasingly wrong and polarized against each other, and so are the representatives.
That's the oil spill of tech. Their externality, instead of dumping toxic waste in a river, they're dumping toxic polarization into society. But the toxic waste in the river didn't make governance not work in a democracy, didn't break the democracy. You're saying that the toxic dump of polarization from these specific tech companies, as they dump that, it's breaking the very thing that we would need to regulate it, because the regulation of this we would think would come from the state, but the state is fundamentally being broken by the externality of these companies.
Yeah, exactly. So what's happening is as these companies operate and polarize the population so that the representatives who have to appeal to their support base can't possibly work together with each other, because if they work together with each other, they lose the increasingly polarized support base. Not to mention that the polarization actually affects the representatives and even the military themselves directly. As these infotech platforms continue to operate, they directly decrease the coherence of government's capacity to govern at all, while increasing their own capacity to influence the population and obviously increasing the total intelligence they have access to know how to change popular opinion to continue to support what they do, and in addition to their financial capacity to lobby and like that. So they're becoming exponentially more capable through the application of exponential technologies while creating an exponential decrease on capability and coherence of the government that would govern them. And you can't have a regulatory body regulate something that is both more powerful than it and growing faster than it. And that's the key underlying thing that we're trying to say here, is that big tech is directly decreasing the coherence of the government's capacity to govern it. And it is getting better faster while making the government get less coherent faster.